Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. I am here today with Nicola, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation actually, because I think it's something that is we all need to explore a little bit more. But I'm not going to kind of delve into it too much. I'm going to go straight in and let Nicola introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself. So, Nicola, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Meera. It's a real pleasure. Pleasure to
Please
be here
just
with your listeners.
sort of explain kind of who you are, what you do, and so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better.
Okay, so I'm Nicola Lucie, and I am a certified shamanic practitioner who specializes in shadow work for women. And unlock the hidden side of the female psyche at the feminine principle. So, really delving into that hidden side of our nature.
Yeah, I mean, I when I read that, I was like, okay, I know nothing about this. This is fascinating, and so can you explain what that means? Because I honestly don't have. It sounds Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I don't know whether my audience feels this way, but when I first read it, shadow work and all that, I thought, okay, this sounds a little bit kind of I don't know whether this is for me. I don't know what that means. So could you kind of just help it explain it so that we can understand what it is that it's actually doing and then perhaps we can talk about the process as well. But firstly, what is it?
Okay, so shadow work, we've all got a shadow. And so it's a part of ourselves that we cannot see. And
Yeah.
it's basically buried in our unconscious. So from the moment that we are born, we develop a sense of our identity growing up. But lots of our nature, our rhythm, our cycles, our true personality is actually buried in the shadow because it's seen as unlovable, unacceptable, and not very good. And so
Mm.
we learn as we're going through life to suppress and bury this part of ourselves. And then, of course, when we experience wounding or trauma or conditioning, again, that impacts us. And so, because it happens very early in life, during childhood, or even going back into the womb and beyond, what happens is that we become so fragmented from that part of ourselves that was feeling healthy and whole beforehand. So, wounding and trauma really does create a kind of fragmentation in our psyche. And so we
Mm.
actually keep living from the wounding and the trauma and the conditioning rather than actually being able to be fully present within the self and experience our own integration and our wholeness.
Mm. I was just going to say, it sort of sounds to me very much like, that we create unconsciously in a way, create, I mean, that's what it sounds like you're saying to me. So it's so much in our psyche. And I'm just thinking actually really strange because I've got a grandson and I was just playing with him and I talked to him and everything. And I was just thinking to myself, that's so interesting because of the things, the expectations that are already upon him, that, well, but he's not sleeping well, and oh, but he's not doing this, and oh, he's feeding this way, or he's doing this. Um, or is he holding that right yet? And is he, so it's all already these expectations that are there. And I suppose what you're saying is that it carries through and you have almost a cycle of that you just keep repeating it. And the clients that I'm working with, it's all coming in my head now. A lot of clients I work with, it feels like, and me as well, myself, feels like there's a repetition. You seem to drop back into this cycle, which can be quite unhealthy, quite unhelpful. Is that the kind of thing you're?
Exactly. So when we're young, we do learn how to live, love, and relate by those people around us. And so when we're growing up, we're being told what to do, what not to do, how to do it, how not to do it, what to say, what not to say. And so therefore, it's their conditioning that then teaches us about our own identity. And so with your grandson, for example, he's learning from you how to behave and believe and how to relate with other people. And so some of those things might not necessarily be healthy for him because we're actually disconnecting them from their own true nature by trying to condition them to what we believe is
Mm,
right and wrong and acceptable and lovable.
yeah, yeah.
And so then these patterns then create fractures in the psyche, and then we keep repeating them into adulthood.
Mm. And do you feel, and this is obviously your opinion, it could be your experience, it could be what you're practicing and how you find things, but do you think that that's sort of what you're describing and this our shadow, as it were. Is that what you're saying? So that's our shadow. That shadow is inside us, and we all have one. Do you think if that's all those things are not allowed to happen, so we're not allowed to express, we're not allowed to be loved in our own way for who we are, and we're constantly looking for that, either not necessarily to please, but sometimes it is, or to be better, or to do better, or there's that cycle, isn't there? I haven't done enough, or whatever. Do you think that becomes unhealthy on a mental and physical level?
Yes, it completely derails us emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, and sexually. And
Mm,
so what happens is that, particularly in our younger years, we might be trying to express, we want a need to be met.
yeah,
And the way in which we have that need is we get angry, we get frustrated, but we
yeah.
don't know that we're getting angry or frustrated. And we're just expressing this emotion that we have absolutely no understanding of. And
Mm,
so, therefore, how our parents or our caregivers or even our peers or teachers, how they interact with that anger then teaches us whether anger is acceptable or
mm,
non-acceptable.
yeah,
So then this is why when we come into later life, we might have these moments of a lot of anger, but we don't actually know what that anger is teaching us about ourselves,
yeah,
what the deeper need is. So we
yeah.
keep expressing it in the way in which we have been taught to express
Right.
it. And
Yeah.
this is why we have a lot of emotional baggage, which is actually suppressed because
Right.
we're not understanding what our emotions are teaching us
Yeah.
about what we've experienced in regards to wounding, trauma, and conditioning.
Mm.
And so when we experience a trauma, for example, something which is so overwhelming for a child to even comprehend trauma, and
Yeah.
that trauma can be anything from being left out of a game at school, or to parents being divorced. But
Mm.
because they don't understand what's happening to them emotionally,
Yeah.
we just we just bury it all.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that trauma then comes out in later life.
Yeah. So I suppose then let's kind of fast track a little bit, I suppose, and go into an adult and then I suppose really what I want to focus on, because obviously the podcast is about menopause, is is menopause and women going through menopause, that transition and that perimenopause stage. For some women it's like it's surgical menopause, so it's very sudden, that has its own issues. And then for others it's this can be a fairly long process, it can be short. But from what I've found and the women that I've worked with, it is a very traumatic experience. It can be a very traumatic experience. So is that, in a way, is that perhaps that kind of, and again, when you're going through trauma, what we found in the women that I've worked with is actually trauma can be a trigger for menopause symptoms to come out even earlier. So again, there's that cycle. So as adults, um, how do we kind of process it? How do we deal with it? What do we do? I know today really we were looking at kind of how do we create healthy boundaries is what we were looking at today. But you're already in that situation. You're already there. That trauma has happened to you as a child, and you're now going through perimenopause or menopause, and your body just isn't the same. Your mind isn't the same. You aren't the same. How do you start unraveling, or how do you start putting things into place and helping yourself?
Yeah. So obviously, when we have a lot of symptoms, whether they are related to our menstrual cycle or going through a life stage like perimenopause or menopause, how we respond to the body is deeply buried in our shadow. So, for example, if we have been conditioned in life as a woman to keep going in
Yeah,
this linear fashion where we are so busy and we put everybody else's needs before our own, and we don't even know what our needs or our boundaries are, then obviously when our body is going through a physical and a biological change, then the
yes,
body is saying, hey, we need to
yeah,
change rhythm, but we're still going full steam ahead.
that's it. Exactly. It literally is what's happening.
And so
Yeah,
we're actually going against our nature.
yeah.
So then what happens is that trigger then comes up and that creates more chaos in the body. And
Okay.
it's saying, okay, well, now we've got hot flashes and we're not sleeping well. And, we're going through all of this biological and physical trauma because we're sick. Okay, but we're actually not sick. We've
No.
actually just come out of rhythm of our own cycle. And
Mm.
that is created from our own relationship of what it means to be a mother, a woman, and a daughter from
Mm.
way back early in life.
Mm.
So if we have continued in that linear fashion, keep ignoring our boundaries, our deeper needs, then of course it's going to affect us
Yeah.
when we come into a life cycle like menopause.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you see it all the time. I see it again in myself. I see it in others where you really are, but I've got to do it this way because this is all I've known.
Yes.
I suppose I think it would, you've answered that question of why, because I was going to say to ask you why are boundaries so important in any stage, but menopause in particular. And you've sort of answered it really is because what I'm hearing you say is that it's because if we don't, we kind of end up becoming quite sick because we're going against what our rhythm is telling us. But it all sounds really easy, doesn't it? It all sort of sounds like, well, yeah, of course that's what you should be doing. But as a person going through it myself and many clients that I have in our audience as well, they may be in that thing where actually but we keep going back to it. We keep going back. How do we go about creating these boundaries? How do we go about helping ourselves not to make ourselves sick and to recognize those rhythms and help ourselves get into those rhythms?
Yes. And so it all comes back down to boundaries.
Right.
Okay, so when we look at where we are not listening to our deeper needs, whether that's emotional needs or whether that is our biological needs or our physical needs, if we're not listening to those deeper needs, then there's a reason why. So we
Mm.
need to do our inner work, okay, to
Mm.
look at, okay, well, on the surface level, I'm experiencing all of these symptoms, but these symptoms are actually being triggered by unresolved trauma or an imbalance in my own emotional understanding, my own emotional intelligence. So when we come back into the body and we start to do our inner work, looking at, okay, well, why can't I assert this boundary? Why can't I listen to this need? Then we actually recognize that there's a limitation in our psyche.
Mm.
And so when we look at that limitation, we're then giving ourselves permission to then go back to when that limitation in our psyche was created. So we're actually going back to the root, back to the moment when that limitation came up. When we
Okay.
go back to the root, we're actually seeing ourselves in a completely different nature. We're seeing ourselves maybe younger. We were maybe at school, we were isolated because of the way in which we had a relationship with our blood, for example. And so therefore we need to ignore it because it's filled with shame or something. So that created a limitation, but by going back there and understanding why it was created, we're then able to then exercise in this moment a healthier
Mm.
boundary.
Right.
It's like our inner psyche, our unconscious is saying, hey, I'm having this problem in menopause because not because I have this deadline or I'm meeting other people's needs. It's the reason why I'm trying to meet everybody else's needs,
Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
way back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we
And
see all of these different aspects of the feminine coming out of a woman's nature because we
yeah.
have been conditioned to care for everybody else. We've been conditioned to stay in the head and keep doing no matter what, which then leads to burnout, stress,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
overwhelm. So the more stress we create in our life, of course, the body is going to react and say, hey, can't do this anymore.
Mm.
We're going
And
through a
yeah, and how do you support with what you do? How do you support women to help create those boundaries, recognize boundaries? How would you do that? How does shadow work?
Okay, so when I'm working with clients, for example, they'll come to me with exactly these types of issues. They've got no
Yeah.
boundaries and they may be suffering through menopause or perimenopause, or their body's changing, or they've gone through a divorce or a death, or something has
Yeah.
happened. So they're at a crossroads in their life. And basically, when we do a session, for example, it's about really helping the woman to come back home into her body, first
Mm.
and foremost, because as women, we have become extremely disconnected from our womb. Okay, so whether we are in surgical menopause or not, or we've had a hysterectomy, we still have this sacred center, which is the sacred center of woman.
Mm.
But we've become so disconnected from it that then obviously we need to come back in. So
Mm.
part of the way in which I work is helping women to come back out of their head and back into their bodies. So they're really understanding their somatic experience. You know, they're starting to feel where they're holding a lot of emotional tension or anger or even grief in the body. So by feeling into the body, we'll then reveal the emotions.
Mm.
You know, so we start off, okay, well, what's being triggered in this part of your body? Well, I'm feeling a lot of anger. Okay, so now let's work with that anger. So that anger is on the surface level. So the
Mm.
more in which we then follow that trigger, that emotional anger, we then follow it deeper and deeper until it will reveal something so buried in the
Mm.
psyche, a deeper emotion that we weren't even aware of, but it kept triggering the anger over
Yeah.
and over.
Yeah.
And it's from that moment then we can then go back to a moment, a memory in their timeline that actually started off that process and created that unhealthy pattern going throughout their life. And so when they're able to see it from that root place, they're able to understand the pattern that it created is just phenomenal. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, I've been living my life like this. And I kind of knew it, but I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And it's from that moment, by bringing the unconscious into the conscious, they're then able to exercise their choice. So they'll
Mm.
see it coming up the next time round. It's like, oh, here we go again. I know why I'm doing this now. Now I get to make an informed decision and make a different choice.
Yeah.
So we don't repeat it.
No.
And that's power.
Yeah, very empowering. And also, again, like you said, helping to create those boundaries and to be able to say no. Um, uh, yeah, I love that idea of how we are actually so disconnected to the feminine and to our own, to us, because it's really interesting. Like, sort of working in the kind of health and fitness, working with women, mainly predominantly, I've chosen to work with women. I suppose I say I've chosen, I've not really chosen, I've just kind of fallen upon it. But I think that's also because um, I grew up with two brothers older than me. I grew up with a very in a household where, you don't think, you just do. You just get on with it. Why are you sitting? Why are you not doing? Da, da, da. Very active, very male. And I've always been really proud of saying, I'm like an alpha male, and actually I think it's so interesting when I think about the fact that I now work with lots and lots of women who are also probably very similar in their mindset to me, because I come across as this, as as we just kind of discussed a bit earlier, that strong woman. But actually connecting with my feminine side can be really difficult. And it's interesting, it's because that's kind of knocked out of you a little bit. But if you have a period, just get on with it. You're having a baby, just get on with it. You're having you just got to deal with it. So it's really, really interesting. I love that aspect of the work that you're talking about. Um, and like I said, I think it must be just so empowering for women to finally kind of begin to start to connect with their feminine side, which is
Yeah.
kind of suppressed by society at the moment, isn't it, really?
It's been suppressed for thousands of years.
Mm.
And so again, oh, just get on with it. Okay. But our biology is so different to a man.
Yeah.
We cannot just get on with it. And so even when we start bleeding, for example, when we have our first period, we're not really
Mm.
taught about what that is doing on the inside.
Yeah.
And actually, our periods are a moment of great power. But because
Yes.
of our relationship to our periods, we've actually suppressed them. We've
Yeah.
kind of cut them off and said, oh, no, no, no. I'm just going to
No.
get on with it. I'm going to ignore what my body is
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we have that relationship with our periods, then of course it's going to have
Mm.
a knock-on effect when we go through motherhood and
Mm.
we go through menopause. Because what's actually happening is in those moments, we're going through a life transition.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need time to integrate what is actually happening to us.
Yeah.
But we're
Yeah.
not given the time or the space, and we're not
No.
allowing ourselves the time and the space to really feel on every level what has actually happened to us or what is happening to us in the moment.
Yeah.
And so we're missing all of this great opportunity.
Yeah, that is exactly the thing I was just going to say. It's actually once you begin to do the work that you're saying, and actually it's a lovely way, I think, to help women to manage their symptoms as well, because actually once you start to recognize and acknowledge, as you're saying, that this isn't just something that's happening that we just need to deal with, which again is what menopause is becoming. It's like, well, we just need to deal with it. Just give me the HRT, or give me the thing that's going to make me that person again. And you kind of have to say, look, hold on. We can help you deal with the symptoms. We can help you manage those symptoms. We can help you navigate this time. But it's called a change for many reasons. And the main reason is because you're going to change physically, emotionally, um, spiritually, in all ways. But actually, by not recognizing, the thing that I've learned a lot from this podcast, from these podcasts that I'm doing, Nicola, is that this time appears to be such a wonderful opportunity for creativity and openness and uh, actually empowerment, if we just accept and acknowledge and recognize that we are not going to be that person, and actually we can be a very different person and so beautiful in so many ways. But that's what I think, as you're saying, it's really interesting, because that, I think it's the feminine acceptance of the feminine that's missing from our conversations about menopause. I actually,
Exactly.
yeah, it's just brilliant. Is that what do you think that's the case?
I completely agree. Because if we
Yeah.
think about, the feminine nature, okay, the
Yeah.
feminine nature is really creativity. I mean,
Yes.
we are able to carry children in our womb, nurture
Mm.
them at birth. Well, then we're able to, just give birth and really explore this whole new world of
Yeah.
creativity. And it's
Yeah.
not just in giving birth to children, but we have this creative energy. And so with menopause, for example, it does, instead of losing our kind of power every single month when we go through our period, as going into menopause, we're actually starting to hold all of this creative energy in the cauldron of our womb.
Yeah.
And it's so magical.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
we give ourselves permission just to sit with it, we can see, oh, well, wait a second. Now I'm not going through that monthly cycle. Something else can be born through me. So what is that? And
Mm.
that's actually more of our hidden nature
Yeah.
that has been so buried in our psyche, in the doing and the craziness and the just getting on with it, that
Mm.
can now come forth.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
No,
so the more in which we tune into that, it's just phenomenal what we can then experience.
yeah.
So it's about
I
giving
mean,
ourselves a choice.
yeah, no, 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 totally, totally see that. I think it's, oh gosh, yeah, it's been lovely. I think this conversation, Nicola, has opened up a lot. And I think for me personally, and I'm hoping for the audience that are listening to this, it's actually made me stop and think about how much am I recognizing the feminine in me, and now how much did I neglect it in the past, but also how I treat others, how I'm working with my clients as well. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. I think it's been so fascinating. I before we close, there's just a couple of things, because I know I could sit here and talk to you for ages. But there's a couple of things that I'd really like you, just before we finish, to share how people can get in touch with you, where they can hear about you, any kind of information that you can share, because I think it will be a really fascinating um, thing for people for the women to explore, and anybody who's listening to this to explore a little bit further. But before we go, we always ask all our guests if they wouldn't mind sharing something, either a ritual or something that they do or practice, which really has helped them and helps them daily, and actually, could help others as well. Would you mind sharing something?
Okay, so because obviously shadow work, I'm always interested in the psyche.
Yes.
So every single morning, my ritual is to journal. Okay, so I'm just coming out of sleep. I've got my first glass of warm water, and I will use that moment just to let go of any dreams. So if I've had any dreams during the night, I will document them, because our dreams are also showing us key pieces of information we need to walk through life. And also, just how am I feeling? What's going on in my life? Where do I feel triggered? But then also, it gives me a moment to reflect on how I'm physically feeling. Okay, so
Mm,
this is me listening to the communication of my body. And so already that connection back with the feminine, back with my own nature is happening on a daily basis because I'm listening. I'm
mm,
not telling it what to do and moving through and pushing her through my own boundaries, but I am listening and being receptive.
yeah,
And so I find that those 20 minutes every single morning just give me so much of a foundation because it helps me to be with me,
yeah,
nobody else. Before I even open the computer or have a conversation with my partner, it's just me, myself, and this is who I am. So I'm really listening to and accepting and hearing my deeper nature and what
yeah,
I need. And then I will take it from there and I will do my own shadow work. Or if, for example, I'm not feeling great, because also going through perimenopause, there are moments when I wake up and it's kind of like, oh, I really don't feel okay today. I'm exhausted, which means I've gone over my own boundaries. So then in that moment, I will say, okay, well, what can I do today? What can I let go of? And what do I absolutely need to do? So
yeah,
that then if I need more rest, I'm giving myself permission to have more rest and
mm,
recuperation.
yeah.
Because I know by doing so the following day, I'll be back up and I'll be okay.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that's just so wonderful. And actually, the way you've explained it as well is great because you do hear a lot about journaling and gratitude, this and that and the other. But actually, sometimes it can just feel a little bit like, oh, what does all of that mean? But actually, you've explained it really well. And that connection, like you're saying, and I'm guilty of this, first thing, wake up in the morning, quick, check who's messaged, what's happened in the world, is everything collapsed around me because, of course, nothing can exist without me being there and checking my phone. And you've reminded me definitely that I need to just stop that, wake up in the morning, take it nice and slow and spend those 10-15 minutes because yeah, you're right, I get up, I go straight onto my phone, then I'm straight into work at whatever 6 or 7, doing my first class and giving everything I have to everyone else suddenly, and actually not taking any time for me. And that's a really really good reminder of how important it is to connect in with yourself, and actually use journaling effectively, along with the work that you do. So, Nicola, please just explain, um, or share with us where anyone who is listening, would can get hold of you. Where can they read more about you? Have you got any bits of information that you could share?
Okay, so everything is on thefeminineprinciple.com. Okay, so I have a
Okay,
load of resources. I've got a podcast. I write beautiful blog posts. I also do a weekly newsletter called Notes from Your Shadow. And so I
fantastic.
invite women to come along and just join the newsletter because every single week I share notes from your shadow to help you
Mm,
really just reconnect with yourself so you can fall in love with your shadow and experience this whole new world that's available to you from in you, not
yeah,
out of you.
yeah.
And then there's the Feminine Principle podcast. And, anybody that wants to just have a call, a conversation, you can go onto the booking page and just book a call with me. And we can just have a chat and open up this Pandora's box
Mm.
that is
That
you.
is you. Gosh, sounds like I've written that down. I am definitely going to be signing up for the newsletter for sure because I do need those reminders just to connect in with the feminine, because everything is all about kind of, that whole male. It's still, we still get swept. I do definitely get swept into this male world, which has been created by men, but we've just lived in it and existed in it without actually thriving. So
Yes,
no, it's
exactly.
fantastic. It's been such a wonderful, wonderful experience speaking to you, and it's really helped me to think a little bit more deeply and just keep reconnecting back and not forgetting, um, our feminine side and our inner self.
Yes. And there's
Thank
so
you,
much
Nicola.
beauty there.
Yeah,
In our
there
feminine,
is.
there is so much beauty that is just laying there.
Yeah,
She's waiting to thrive and to take
to
part in
thrive.
our life. And so the more in which
Absolutely.
we can reconnect with her by going in rather than
Mm,
keep going out, we
yeah.
have a whole load of potential and power waiting for us. Things that we
Oh,
didn't even know.
yeah. Absolutely. I definitely second that. I can, like you said, when you connect, you can feel it. Thank you, Nicholas, so much for your time today and for talking to us and sharing, the work that you do, which I think sounds absolutely brilliant. But thank you so much for joining us today.
A real pleasure. Thank you so much, Meera.